All right, let's take a seat. We're going to get the program started, so please come on up. Take a seat. On behalf of mHUB, want to thank you all for coming out here tonight. This is an exciting first kickoff for 2018. We have about 200 different events already on the calendar for the upcoming year, and very excited to be getting kicked off with Chris, absolutely, Michael, and Karen. So what is mHUB? mHUB, how many of you all have been here before? That's what I like to see. Keep coming back. We're a product innovation center, right? Nonprofit organization focused on creating the conditions for product innovation to thrive. What does that mean? It means bringing talent together, connecting them with resources, and unleashing their innovative capacities on industry so that we're launching and building new businesses in the 21st century here in Chicago. Part of that is also bringing communities and network and thought leadership together, and that's what we're doing here tonight. Before we get started with the actual program, because what we're all about is launching new companies, we're actually going to start something new in 2018 where we invite one of our companies up to make a pitch to all of you so you really understand what sort of technology, what sort of companies are coming up. So I'd like to invite Thomas from OceanCom to come up and talk about his company.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm the CTO of OceanCom. We're developing a ultrasound-based technology that will enable high-speed wireless communication underwater, in the ocean, and the deep sea. We started 3 years ago on the campus of the University of Illinois. Last year, we expanded to Chicago. And this year, we'll launch our first product, the M300 modem, that will provide Wi-Fi-like wireless connectivity underwater at distances up to 1,000 feet, point to point. If you want more range, you need to use more nodes. We are primarily looking at customers in the defense industry. We are a prime contractor to the US Navy. We are also working with the offshore oil and gas industry and the deep sea mining companies. Offshore oil and gas and deep sea mining relies on underwater robots to do their work. Today, those robots rely on cables for communication to the operators. In fact, those robots are tethered up to the surface, where there's a big surface vessel that handles that tether. And that vessel is actually the problem. That vessel is very, very expensive. It costs $100,000 a day and more, just because it needs to have a certain size for it to be feasible. And with our wireless technology, companies can do away with cabling. They can basically cut the cord on those robots if you want, and do away with those ships, which will reduce cost of doing underwater work by a factor of 10. The ocean is an interesting space, so it's vast. People know that, but it's also very rich in resources. There's more than 2/3 of oil and gas is offshore. More than 80% of cobalt is offshore. And actually last year, the price of cobalt tripled. It turned out cobalt is a critical material for the production of high-performance batteries. Batteries are obviously needed for the kind of technologies that are pushing the envelope, renewable energy, electric cars, and more portable devices. Turns out there's only enough cobalt for 1 million electric cars per year in land-based mines. So if you want to ever build 100 million cars a year like they do today, then you need to tap ocean resources. And 2018 is exciting because this year, the first deep-sea mine will commence operation in New Guinea. So that's fun. Thanks.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much, Thomas. Now I'd like to get it going and introduce Karen Kerr from GE Ventures, who will be moderating our conversation tonight, titled Modem Wars of the 1990s, but we're very much going to get much further into communication technologies and electronics and talk fundamentally how companies like Motorola and USRobotics defined Chicago's innovation, community innovation capacity. So turn it over to Karen. Karen is with GE Ventures again, leads their advanced manufacturing group, and has been one of our greatest supporters since mHUB was an idea, not even on paper. So we wouldn't be here today without early support from GE Ventures and Karen. So thank you very much. Absolutely.
Super. Well, let's get our two panelists up here, Chris Galvin and Michael Seedman. And you gentlemen can sit over there. So as Haven said, we're privileged really today to be joined by, I call them two of the deans of the Chicago tech scene.
The gray hairs.
And they have been competitors, they've been co-investors, and they are friends. So it should be a fun discussion. And at some point, we'll open it up to questions, so hope you guys start thinking about what you want to ask. Chris is the chairman and co-founder of Harrison Street Real Estate Capital. He was previously the chairman and CEO of Motorola. He was the chairman of Navtech. He was the chairman of CleverSafe. He served on numerous public and government boards as well. So thank you, Chris.
But that's all he's ever done.
The list is quite long, so just in the sake of actually getting to some discussion, I will maybe move on to your brief introduction, which also the list is quite long, Michael. So Michael is currently at Cirrus Capital, right? You're one of the partners there. Michael was previously the senior vice president and general manager of USRobotics in their personal computer division. He really is a serial entrepreneur. He founded Practical Peripherals, which was sold to Hayes Microcomputer, so he's been in the modem area a super long time. Michael's also done a number of other startups, including founding Integra Technologies, which was sold to Zircon. So tremendous experience in this space, and delighted to have him here. He was also a co-investor in CleverSafe, so he's a great tech investor as well. So thank you, gentlemen. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was intrigued to see that both of you sort of finished school in about the 70s, thereabout, and embarked on your career. Neither of you have tech backgrounds academically. So, Chris, you went into the family business, but did you think that you would go into the family business from the very beginning? Yes. You said yes.
Yeah, oh yes, the answer is yes. And it turns out that neither my grandfather nor my father nor I were engineers. And what we learned over the years was somebody needs to be thinking conceptually and strategically about the business. And if one learns how to hire really, really talented technical talent, I mean, that they can advise you as to what to do. They can tell you the risks of what you might imagine. But because we didn't know the details, we didn't sweat them. And we just said, make it work. And if you make it work, it's going to be a big business. And so we were kind of the cheerleaders from behind, and then we did obviously have to make some tough calls on occasion. But I tell the story, it's a true story, literally. The night before I went to work at Motorola, I grabbed my father. I said, Dad, I want to ask you a question, and depending on how you answer it, will determine whether or not I show up for work tomorrow morning. And so he sat down, and he said, what's the question? I said, if you promise me that the minute you determine that I cannot be the CEO of Motorola, or that the board won't allow that, or the management team won't follow me, or whatever it turns out to be, the only promise you have to make me is no matter where you are in the world, go jump on your serial number 1 G2. He did buy the first one. And you find me and come tell me. And he said, well, then what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to stand up and shake your hand and say, Dad, thank you very much for fulfilling your promise to me. And he said, well, then what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to give you a big hug and say thank you and tell you I've enjoyed every minute being at Motorola, whatever. He said, well, then what are you going to do? I said, we're going to walk out arm in arm with a big smile on our face. He said, well, then what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go in the real estate business. Literally, I said that the night before I started work on Motorola. Now we've raised $20 billion in Harrison Street real estate, and so I had to have a backup plan to go in.
Fair enough. And Michael, you went to USC and then pretty much shortly thereafter founded a company.
Yeah, so anybody that thinks that there was a plan and it's not a serendipitous walk through life has got it all wrong, because I did go to USC and studied accounting, but my love forever was electronics, and I would build things. Basically, my whole life I was building things. I was a maker before makers were makers, and a ham radio operator at 13 years old, and there just wasn't anything technical that I wasn't interested in. So I remember the day that I drove down to Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard, went to 1 Wilshire Boulevard where Price Waterhouse was on the 10th floor, got in the elevator, got my suit on, which I don't wear very much, but you guys don't know that. Went up to the 10th floor, got out, and there was this sea of cubicles. And I thought, oh my God, this is not the kind of stuff that I wanted to do. And I went through and did the interview and left and took my tie off as I was walking down that hallway, got on the elevator and went down and knew that I was never going to be an accountant, and now I am unemployable. And so I started a company because I knew there was no job for me. And that was practical. And, practical was, it was teeny. I mean, I think I borrowed a little bit of money to build something that was interesting, and there's some more stories I could tell about that, but it ended up that I just went to work every day, and these businesses grew, they grow around you. If you do the right things and you serve customers, you grow with these businesses. And so that's what really happened. What happened was I didn't think I was going to get hired, and so I needed to start something.
Okay, that's fair. Chris, you just said, hey, look, I don't sweat the details. I find that fascinating when Motorola invented Six Sigma. Isn't that about sweating the details? I mean, I'm at General Electric and we use it all the time, but really it got invented at Motorola.
Yeah, we use Six Sigma in everything, believe it or not, and we designed a real estate financial private equity business model using Six Sigma. And when you think of innovating is introducing the new. And we think we're the first people ever in the history of real estate to design a financial business model using Six Sigma. And as a consequence, it's allowed us to have fortunate success. And so the whole idea is, when I say sweat the details, there's so many things that have to go on in a high technology company to make a product work. And have it work the first time, and to do something really new, you've got to have enormous talent. You have to have enormous manufacturing prowess, great quality control, et cetera, but our job was to organize that process, hire the people, make sure the strategy was right. That's what the management of the company at the senior level does, and that was the role I played. But I didn't have to. I did build 2 lights-out factories, and then I did have to sweat the details on that. But we had a lot of fun experimenting with things.
Fair enough. So today we find ourselves in an era where, billions, some say trillions of things are going to get connected to the internet. GE is connecting our wind turbines. Ford is connecting their automobiles, any variety of personal health, fitness tracking tools, and what have you. And if we go back to the 70s, 80s, that's sort of when we had the dawn of just really connecting personal computers to the internet, where America was getting connected. And you two were both at the center of that with your companies, with Motorola and USRobotics. And it's interesting that the two such important communications players were here in Chicago. What was going on in Chicago at the time? Why was that one of the centers of excellence on the communications front?
Well, first of all, the company that I started was in Southern California. And I ended up selling that company to a company called Hayes Microcomputer Products, which was in Atlanta. And they were really, at that time, the dominant player in the personal computer modem business. After I sold it to Hayes, after we sold it to Hayes, the guys at USR, who had already started here, Casey Cowell and the whole group in the city, they had grown to a point where there needed to be two models being run. There needed to be a commercial product segment, sector, whatever term we use, and a personal communications one. And so they understood intuitively that there were two different business models that needed to be run. And so that's when they went looking for somebody to run the personal communications division. And I had just left Practical, and I got a call from a headhunter, and the guy said, we're looking for a general manager, and I said, in the modem business, and I said, I'm not interested at all. I said, it's crazy business. And he said, well, you know, I said, look, I'm going on vacation. I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. If you don't find anybody else, call me back. And so, sure enough, I turned to my wife, who I think is here, and I said, well, that was pretty flattering. I just got called by one of my big competitors, and they want me to run one of the divisions. And she said, where are they? And I said, in Chicago. And she said, when are we leaving? And I said, leaving? First of all, I don't know anything about this. And second of all, that's in Chicago. Yeah. So 2 weeks later, this guy calls back. And he says, did you think about it? And I said, well, I'm slightly interested now. And he said, will you come out to Chicago? And I think it was maybe August or September of the year. It was beautiful here. It was absolutely beautiful. And I went out and I met the guys at USR, and the weather was perfect.
One of those recruiting
and they
days.
said, it's like this all the time. And I said, great. So we made a deal, and that's when we split the business, and the guys building commercial products that went to America Online or CompuServe, IBM Global Networks, those kinds of products were built by one of the groups at USR, and we were building all the little modems that everybody had on their computer. And so that's how it started in Chicago through Casey, and I was lucky enough to be part of the growth at the time that the business was expanding. But a lot of the decisions they made in Chicago before I got there were decisions that clearly were going to give us an unfair advantage in the modem business. And that's why it was interesting to me.
What's your perspective on why Chicago was one of the centers of excellence?
Well, let's see. So in our world, we had a better core competence in radio frequency technology than wired modems, which is why these guys beat the pants off us in the consumer business. And no question about it. But anyway, so, but the one thing that did occur was we had a philosophy in the family of trying to be first in a business, okay, so that you can derive all of the cycles of learning and therefore accumulate these cycles of learning so you could avoid failure as time went forward. So Chicago became kind of the hub of wireless expertise, because Motorola was really the only company, essentially one of the few companies other than companies in Europe and Japan that were investing in this very much, and so we cultivated a set of engineers from IIT and all across. There you go. So ultimately, it became a place where an enormous amount of innovation took place in shrinking devices to make them portable, and then increasing the ability to propagate intelligence across RF. And as time went on, it turned out to be a big deal in the military business, big deal in the police business, big deal among consumers. And so there was a hub of expertise that was in Motorola labs in Chicago that spurned the whole European digital system was actually invented in Schaumburg. All the intellectual property we held, and it almost stopped the entire industry because the Europeans had decided they were going to use their market as hostage to expropriate intellectual property from those of us who actually originated it and invested in it to get access to the market. We said, no, you're not. And we fought them tooth and nail, and finally the European Union came along and agreed with us, and so we got fair and reasonable terms for our intellectual property, and we let the industry start.
So being first was a critical aspect for you. And now, and correct me because I don't know that I know all the details here, but at the time, wasn't USRobotics like #1 in these like computer modems space? And then Motorola, you're right, you have tremendous radio RF technologies, decided to get into that space and to go after them. Why was that an important space for Motorola to be in?
That if you wanted to see where the world was going, you had to stand on a lot of plateaus and assign people a mission when they're in that plateau, so they're looking in a particular direction. But as long as you have many, many people looking in all different kinds of directions, hopefully you won't miss what's going on. So when it turned out that wireline data communications was a business, we weren't in it at all. So we said strategically we're going to buy two companies. One was a company called UDS, Universal Data Systems, down in Huntsville. There was a custom modem manufacturer. They built a Bloomberg system, okay, in a few small factories down there. And then another company in Boston called Codex, and that was in the enterprise modem space. So we got into it because we said we can't afford not to be in it.
And so you're sitting over at USRobotics, and then Motorola jumps into the space and like drops the prices dramatically. What are you? I mean, at the time, USRobotics was certainly much younger, a lot younger than
we were.
Hey, no, wait, hold on just a second. Michael, I want you to be very kind in your answer.
Absolutely, Chris. So I think it's fair to point out, and I'll tell a story because it really is a really fun story. I'm not so sure Chris will love this one, but you got to remember that Motorola has to be given the credit for being in spectacularly large markets, and I think we talked about this on the phone last week, that these markets don't start spectacularly large, and there's a big hole in it, and you say, well, I think I'll take that market. I'll take that segment. I'll take the dominant segment of this market. You start with these small markets, and you become really good at it, and maybe you have 30 or 35% of this small market, and the market grows, and you end up with 30 or 35% of a gigantic market. So to give him credit, the family put together so many of these markets that just because they weren't a really tightened competitor with USR, I just think that there's it's not really connected that way. So I'll tell you the story. I hope you won't hate me for this story. So who was the modem guy? John. We'll just say it, John. So I had left USR, and I met somebody from Motorola, and they said, "Oh, you ran the personal communications division at USR," and I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Well, do you know John?" And I said, "No," and he said, "You don't know John? He ran the modem division at Motorola." And I said, "I don't know him." And he said, "But you ran the USR modem division. How could you not know John?" And I said, it just never was part of the conversation because we were in different markets. His stuff was commercial markets, you know, the big head ends, and ours was, you know, the burgeoning different segment that we dominated at the beginning, and we got to grow into a really large segment. And we didn't really overlap that much. I mean, it's really fun to say that we had these battles. And he did have products in retail that, I don't know if you dropped the price, I don't even remember, but it was so far, it was so different because they were a latecomer in that part of the market. And we had been at that for a much longer time and had a dominant position in it. And that's really how I would explain the reason that we got to beat Motorola at this.
You had Casey, and you had Terry Garunke, and you had a variety of very good marketing people, and you had good technologists like yourself, and you focused on that market, and you were better than anybody. So it was very admirable. I'm just going to. So here's an example of the fun that I had at Motorola. So when you say, what did the Galvins do? We had a chance to say yes to the ideas that everybody else said no to. And we sought them out. Okay, so an example would be in China, we ultimately trained some engineers, and in Beijing, the engineers wanted to design the whole phone instead of taking pieces and being a part of a program across the country. So I said, well, against all the managers' objections, I said, let them do it. What do we have to lose? They've never done it before. They'll probably come up with some fantastic ideas, so let's see. And so they had learned that we had bought the technology, the sort of neural net technology that could do cursive and kata and kana recognition. So this is a product that we built in 1998. So this would be 8 years ahead of the iPhone. It has a touchscreen phone. Like Samsung's, it can use a stylus to write on the phone. It had character recognition, so you could write messages with letters in English or in any language that was a Romance language, and then you could put in all the Chinese characters. You could send messages back and forth like this. This is 8 years ahead of the iPhone.
So I have a question.
What's that? What's that?
So why did Apple get to do that and you didn't?
Well, see, I wasn't there when Steve did it. So I'd like to believe that we could have solved that problem. The issue was most of the time when mistakes were made, like, for example, a lot of people think Motorola missed digital. That's one of the great old wives' tales that is completely untrue because we invented GSM in Schaumburg and got all the intellectual property, and the Europeans had to deal with us or they couldn't go into business because we own the intellectual property. Kind of a thing, but the challenge was the mistakes that Galvin's typically made was we were too early and we invested too big, okay? And this was an example of, it was the size of a pager, it was a completely working GSM phone, it had all this data communications in it, it was easy to use from a human interface standpoint, and the US carriers didn't understand it. The Chinese carriers loved it, so they started buying it, we sold it all over Asia in this particular case, but we couldn't get distribution for this phone at AT&T and Verizon and a few other carriers because it just didn't have a button on it, and they believed that's what you had to have. So their experiences in life.
It's interesting, and to some extent, if I think about you're talking about Apple here, I don't know if anybody remembers Go. Does anybody remember that company that was trying to do, the PDA with the handwriting and They broke their pick. A lot of venture capitalists lost a lot of money. Palm Pilot was there as well. It's just it's taken a long time.
US Robotics bought Palm Pilot. So I'm sorry. And we saw it as a wood model when they showed it, when Donna Dubinsky and Jeff Hawkins came by. And he had this piece of wood, and he said, this is what I want to make. And we ended up buying the company against my better judgment. I thought it was a horrible idea, that the Apple Newton failed before that, that nobody wanted, the HP 75 and 85 LX, all those other products failed before this. And to get into this, I thought was a terrible idea, but they did it anyway. And now we had, and then we had Handspring, and it was very successful at the time.
But what changes to enable that kind of success?
What changes to enable the...
For an idea that had been germinating to actually take off.
Well, that's an interesting question. So I think that there's this technology that enables ideas or products, and there's a few people that are trying to solve this problem. And this technology becomes available whether it's a fast microprocessor or a really capable processor that can do math or lots of memory, and they enable these products for people trying to solve it. And so you end up with a few people that take it on, and just because the technology has gotten faster or more capable, it enables the capability of the product, which meets that minimum market requirement, and it takes off. So, I just remember the first product that we built was a print buffer, and it was the printers were very slow, and we could build a box between a computer and a printer, so it would buffer all the data and feed it to the printer really slowly, and we could get back to work because the computers at that time only did one thing at a time, and that was enabled by low-cost RAM. The problem was there for a long time, but it was enabled when you could buy 16K or 32K or 64K chips for dollars instead of not available or hundreds of dollars.
And any thoughts from you on that topic? I mean, Motorola has brought so many technologies to market. You got companies like, some are fast followers once they figured out that the market is, but Motorola has made many markets. Any thoughts from you on how one goes about doing that?
Well, you never really know when the market's going to take off. No one does. And a whole set of things have to be in concert or in confluence to make it ultimately come to pass. One of the things that Steve Jobs doesn't get enough credits for, he's not a very nice man, so that everybody understands, but he was a genius. And so the iPod story of ultimately being able to distribute music legally, with a license, in this instance, is actually what made the company. They had a distribution system of which they could make money in software and in content or whatever, which enabled the ability to download apps and expand the application for that phone. And without it, it would have been just another isolated product, and that's what caused these other products to fail. He created a network and the ability to distribute to his devices in a completely unique Apple ecosystem, and secondarily, he created such a unique marketing approach and great, elegant design that no matter what, I was up in Aspen, and they asked me when the iPhone came out, so how many do you think they're going to sell? And I said, well, they're going to sell to 70% of Apple's customers will buy one no matter what. No matter what Apple sold to that ecosystem, they're buying every product. And so that gave them a launching pad because the products were that good. Steve was that good.
So when you left Motorola, you started a private equity shop. You started investing, and you also started doing a lot of chairmanships in tech companies. Why investing? How have you how did you develop your investment style and approach?
If I haven't got some high-tech thing going on in my system, I get a little itchy because I can't live without it. And so I love new ideas. I love the ideas that nobody thinks will work because they're too difficult, they're too impossible, it's never been done before, whatever. And my joke is, so what did you just say? You said this won't work? I said, would you say that one more time? If you'll say it a third time, I'm going to do it. And so, and why, by the way, that's something my grandfather learned through failure. Okay, he went bankrupt twice. Okay, and so he ultimately determined that he had to learn from every failure so as not to have the next one occur. So we always like to get out in front and have the inexpensive cycles of learning as opposed to the later stage, more expensive ones or whatever. It's just a philosophy. And if you're first, you have a really big advantage. I mean, a really big advantage. So, and we happen to believe that innovation is a matter of survival, and the definition of innovation is the introduction of the new. We get up every day looking for the new.
So when you first came across Clever Safe, was that one of the, this can't work?
No. Well, when you tell your story, I can tell you mine.
Right. So Clever Safe was a company a Chicago company, started by Chris Gladwin. And so that's tough to keep. It was very difficult to figure out which one I was talking to. But anyway, different story. Chris had a vision for storing photographs. And he wanted to store photographs safely in a geographically distributed network of these storage facilities that you could fail a certain number of these storage facilities and still get the data back and rebuild it and make it available. And so we got together at lunch one day and he told me the story. You know, Chris is a brilliant guy. I mean, he had two really marginal companies before that. But you could tell he's a really bright guy. And, you know, you're always investing in really smart people, right, with great ideas. And just because the first one didn't work doesn't mean the second one's not going to work. And so we got involved, but I hope I'm not taking a punchline away from you, but that the business changed for years as we searched for the application. The core data, the stuff that Chris was working on, CleverSafe was working on, that wonderful company with all those really smart engineers were working on, at the core was about this unreliable data storage. And it ended up that the business, you know, when we looked at the installations that we got, they were 12 racks of computers with storage devices in them. Nobody put them all over the world for data failure or redundancy or geographically geographic diversity. They put them in one room, but it was because it was a really reliable way that you could fail drives, which all of them fail, and still get the data back. But that wasn't the first thought. That wasn't the way we started the company. It was the iterations that we went through to find the application that was the killer application. I hope I didn't take too much away.
No, not at all. My story on CleverSafe was I got a call from Dennis Roberson one day, and he is the CTO. He was the CTO of Motorola when I was CEO. He was down at IIT as a provost for technology or whatever, and he called me one day and he said, "Chris, you have to come see me." And I said, "Why do I have to come see you, Dennis?" He said, "Because there's a technology that's starting up at IIT that's classic Galvin Motorola innovation." And I said, well, Dennis, if you want me to see it and you recommend it, I'll come see it. So I went down and we sat in the cafeteria at IIT, and Chris got about 45 minutes into his story, and I said, I'm in. And somebody said, well, how could you have made a decision to lead we didn't have all the details done, the third round that quickly? And I said, well, one, I'm always listening and vetting for truly original ideas. And this was going to be a diversion and a new vector of the RAID technology roadmap in storage. I mean, it was a totally different approach to how you mix and match the storage and then retrieve it, kind of a thing. And because it was going to be able to be on day one, essentially, as they started the business, a brand new avenue of how you went about storage in the IT business or whatever, I said, because we can be first, let's go for it. And so we did things with Mike's help of building an intellectual property program. I mean, I think we sold it to IBM. We had 470 patents we'd filed and turned over to them. Ultimately, they prosecuted 750. So we got in early. And so almost no one could use the technology unless they breached our intellectual property. So it was a chance to be first and solving a massive scale storage problem that nobody else could really solve in the way that these guys were solving it.
So you two met on working on CleverSafe, right? Many in the audience are entrepreneurs working on companies, and I think we've got a couple of investors, and the investors know that it's never a straight line, as you say, Michael, in any of these cases. How does the board help the company through that? Because I tell you, I've seen more companies fail because they got terrible boards. Tell me what Chris did as chairman to help through that process.
Yeah, well, this was really easy. So Chris, so the whole idea of being a mentor or a board member or somebody sharing or being a sounding board for a business or what's going on is that you've seen a little bit around the corner and you can help somebody a little bit sooner to see what's going on or what's going to happen than if you hadn't been through the kinds of things that we've been through as entrepreneurs and running businesses. And so I'd say that what Chris did, so there's an example, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but there's an example of something that Chris saw a year. I mean, was raising, first of all, he's a very calm guy in the boardroom, believe it or not. But he saw something going on a year before anybody else in the boardroom saw it. And he brought it up, and we really discounted it. We really just didn't want to hear it. And he was very persistent, and ultimately we took a really half-assed approach to look into this thing that he thought was going wrong or there was this problem. And
What was the problem?
well, it was a management issue. It was a coverage issue. It wasn't really a management issue. It was who's taking care of what, how it's being taken care of. He saw that parts of the business weren't being taken care of correctly before we did. And he was really persistent about trying to figure out how he could get that fixed. And ultimately, we didn't fix it. We waited a whole nother year. And the next year rolled around, and he'd been talking about it the whole year. And the next year rolled around, and what he was concerned about came true. And this time we took it seriously, and we went and solved this management problem. And that's when the company really took off. And so when you ask me what he was good at, I think he was really good at seeing these structural things about a business that were wrong or that were going in the wrong direction. And I think it's because he sees around the corner a little bit.
Because here you are, like probably pulling your hair out for a year.
This was talent management is a very complicated process, and many people have many skills, but most people don't have every skill, and so they're good at certain things. They're not quite as good at others. That's why you build a team, okay? And you have a team of all kinds of experts in this instance. And I think the thing we discovered was that Chris is a genius. Chris Galvin was a genius, just off the charts, smart, architecture, software, technology, whatever. But he wasn't as good at the general manager activities that the company needed to really grow quickly and prosper and that kind of a thing. So, and so the debate was, how did you solve that problem? And we eventually brought in a fellow named John Morris, who was at Juniper Networks and IBM, 23-year guy, fantastic, and a fantastic leader or whatever. And when John came in, he actually had practiced those skills in many businesses at IBM. So he was able to apply without making any rookie errors, so to speak, those skills. And the minute those things got aligned, the place took off like a rocket.
Yeah, so the importance of building great teams and
Right. Exactly.
making sure that you're paying attention to that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do we need to focus on from a communications perspective as we connect up these trillions of things? Security is an issue people are talking about. Obviously, as we think about, Chris, you've built lights out factories. You worked on building lights out factories. You know, connecting my factory to the cloud. Well, my supply chain guys go, yeah, it better be local, right? What needs to happen from a technical perspective to really enable, industrial IoT to take off at scale? What technologies do you think we're missing?
Well, let's see. To some degree, I think the Internet of Things, which I think John Chambers came up with at Cisco, is probably set the industry back because it's one of these large ideas, you can't get your arms around it kind of a thing or whatever, and the process of connecting things, and Mike used to connect laptop computers and home computers into the network and that kind of thing. We used to connect police radios in, and it's complicated to do that. And there's a whole set of standards and all kinds of things that have to occur. And just because someone says it's going to be big someday doesn't mean it's there, doesn't mean it works, doesn't mean you get real utility out of it or whatever. It's in a very embryonic stage at the moment. And so it will develop over a period of time. It'll make a huge contribution, but it's really not going to be a big business until 5G is installed in 70% of the SMSAs, statistical metropolitan areas here and in Europe and in China. And when they get 5G rolled out, well, then this can work, but that's 15 years from now.
Okay, so 5G is going to be a real big factor here.
Yeah.
And do you agree with that? That IoT, or as Jeff Immel would like to say, industrial Internet of Things, because that's where we're trying to connect up our machines. Do you think we've set the industry back?
I don't know about that. I do have an opinion about how IoT is going. Sorry. So at the beginning of the internet, it was not, the internet, these routers were not built to do what they're doing today. They weren't secure. They were multi-protocol routers at the time, built for a completely separate purpose. And they've iterated these things to the point where there's a certain amount of security and a certain amount of safety in the internet as we know it for our browsers and our computers. We haven't gotten to the point where you can put billions of devices on that network. And that, in my mind, has to be the stuff that's being worked on, because you have to be able to put a baby monitor on the network and know that it's not stealing data from your local your computer on your local network. And so there's a lot of those kinds of things, and I talk about baby networks and local networks, but it's the same thing if you put a gateway on a Caterpillar. You got to know that the data's secure and it's being delivered and you're analyzing it correctly and you're doing things about it. So this is a process. And think about how long the internet took to be where it is today. It's, you know, every one of these things is a 20-year process. And so we're a quarter of the way into a 20-year process in my mind. And it will be a really big thing. There's no question about it. It's a big thing now. It's going to be a giant thing. But there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of smart people working on a lot of parts of it.
Your downloading of information collected in any one of your GE jet engines. When the plane lands, to disgorge that information from the airplane takes longer than it does to turn the airplane around from a maintenance standpoint, to clean it and all that kind of stuff. So there are certain technologies and systems that have to get organized to be able to use the data that people are collecting, and if they can't, then it has no utility. So there's a bandwidth issue there for the GE engine.
Where do you think most of the money is going to get made in this in 20 years from now, when IoT is a reality and industrial IoT is a reality? Who's going to make the money? Where will the money get made? GE, right?
Yeah, GE. I don't know. So that's a really good question, because if you look at the stack of what an IoT device is and what it ultimately is, so you collect a bunch of data to do something, right, that causes some outcome. It's a generator that's vibrating, a bearing that's going out. It's I mean, there's so many examples of what this is. And if you look at this in layers, there's a whole bunch of layers that have to be built. You know, it's the hardware layer, it's the sensor layer, it's the microcode or embedded code, it's the communications, it's the analysis, it's the do something about the data that you've now extracted. And if you see, IoT is not, to me, it's not a business that you take on and say, I'm going to be an IoT provider. It's a business that Caterpillar may take on to sense 100 things on their tractor, or Boeing will take on that senses tens of thousands or thousands of things on their airplane. It's not a company saying, I have an IoT device and I'm going to change the world with it. You talk about the channel, and channels are really important. You talk about the channel of distribution for an IoT device. You want to be an IoT device at McDonald's? What does that mean? It's got to be McDonald's that hires somebody to mechanize or sense all the things that are important to them. If you're going to be an IoT provider for a Caterpillar, they don't want you to be an IoT provider. They want you to provide the hardware and the firmware to collect data so they can sell it to their customers. It's just the idea that it's a company that says I'm the IoT provider doesn't make any sense to me, because it's not how things get distributed.
So GE and McDonald's and Caterpillar will make money. Do the sensor guys make money? Do the communications guys make money? Or is it all the AI guys? Or will the AI guys even make the money because
I don't know.
the analysts?
Yeah.
Somebody's
I
like,
don't-
Gartner's going to make all the money. Gartner's making all the
You know,
money.
when we looked at the stack that it took to build a modem, there was like 7 things in there. And if you played in one layer, you were never going to win. You were never going to make enough margin. You were never going to be a real player. You had to find 2 or 3 or 4 places to play. I see it the same way in IoT. There's 7 or 8 layers or 10 layers of the stack. And if you're the microprocessor manufacturer, I don't think you get rich. If you're the sensor manufacturer, I don't think you get rich. If you're the guy that puts those things on a board, I don't think you get rich. I don't know how to find the 3 or 4 layers where there's actually money there, but I've looked at it for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't know where it is. Everybody says it's in the data that you sell back to the customer. I don't know.
Great. I just want to thank you guys.
Okay.
I think we'll shift to Q&A now.
Okay, super.
Thank you all for doing this. I'm Sabrina from IIT. Hey, everybody. Chris Gladwin was great about taking IIT students under his wing and making a successful business and making students millionaires and encourage them to move on. I'm wondering if the two of you have 1 or 2 suggestions on students just graduating and how they can move forward, what just little bits of advice that you can give them to move forward. Thank you.
To move forward in their career? Well, I think on that one, it's sort of simple. Whatever they enjoyed studying, okay, they should continue on that vector, because if you enjoy what you do, you're more curious and you work harder and all those other kinds of things. So whatever they discovered that piqued their curiosity at IIT or any other school, follow the path.
I don't disagree. Yeah. I mean, the best thing, the thing that I share with people that I speak to that are just out of school is that the best time in the world to do something outrageous and commit yourself in time and focus when in your 20s, when you don't have a lot of commitments and you don't have a lot of problems or issues to deal with. And so that's one of the pieces of coaching that I always share is that if you have a chance to get involved with something that's risky or time consuming or hard, do it early. Yeah, there you go. Same thing, yeah.
Hi, my name is Carl. My question has to do with some of the RF and some of the things that are happening in our country and compare it to other parts of the world. So recently, 10 years ago, we had 700 megahertz that got auctioned off, and most recently we had 600 megahertz auctioned off in the United States. And that's gone to private investors who now own it as opposed to the public, like in India or wherever. And that puts a bit of a stranglehold, in my view, of carriers and other operators having opportunity and access. As well, recently too, we see that the FCC is dizzying on net neutrality. And it goes against the grain, in my mind, of what the internet is all about. And it seems like it's all come about because we used to go out and fetch information, and now everything's coming back our way, and we're seeing more and more content and things being delivered. I was wondering what your opinions are about net neutrality. Is it really important that it stays open, as opposed to the chokeholds being put on by carriers and operators in both contexts, in 600 megahertz, 700 megahertz, and the internet?
So I may not be the most popular guy in the room when I say this, but I did this also up in Aspen in 2007 when Steve was introducing his iPhone. A fellow from Google said, well, what do you think about net neutrality? And I said, I think it's the worst policy in the entire world. It will suffocate innovation. And think about it for a second. If you like to construct things in your garage, and you've got some fantastic power tools, should your neighbors be able to come and open your garage, come in, use your power tools, build what they want to build, and then walk down the street? Okay, so facilities-based competition drives investment. It drives productivity. It drives improving the network itself. And anytime you have to give away something free, that's what it's worth. Not much. So I am a strong advocate. I know it's unpopular of the current policy that's being advocated by the FCC. To be do-gooders isn't a great way to invest. So if you're Verizon, if you're AT&T, pick any one of the other networks, if you're writing checks for billions and billions and billions of dollars of facilities and all the maintenance to keep all that up and to keep the rural rules in play so people can have access in this case, nobody else should be able to jump on your network and use it free. And then if you own it, you get to price it, and as long as there are 2 or 3 or 4 networks out there that can compete with that person, it'll all.
And the reason I do was the last part of the thing that Chris brought up, and that is that somebody's got to buy this equipment. You want gig speeds, you have to have innovation to build gig networks, and gig networks cost money, and somebody's got to pay those bills because of the tens of thousands of people it takes to design these things. I mean, it's just...
A utility or not. And if it's a utility, then maybe you think about
If it's a utility, the government should buy it.
Yeah, I know. I think there's a good point.
Take
That's a
back
good point.
AT&T. We'll go through that thing again. The rules are there. So if people think of it as a utility, that's fine. We'll bring back AT&T and go and do that. But I think they're all highly competitive and differentiated networks in many ways. Some are better than others, and let people compete on facilities. But
The content players probably have a different point of view.
I don't have anything to say about that, but I know from working with Michael that part of the modem wars in the 90s had to do with the intersection of standards, which are important for establishing communications networks, and intellectual property. And we actually had some clashes there, but I wonder if you have any views about, and you mentioned intellectual property a number of times, but today the way in which standards are being developed or not being developed, and the way in which intellectual property then plays into that issue of what happens to the intellectual property that gets built into the standards.
let's see. So I'm.
By the way, that's the General Counsel of USR.
There you go. Okay. No
George
wonder,
Vineyard.
No wonder it was so well articulated. But let's see. So I'm about 10 years away from the process of studying the changes that the FCC is trying to make and what the standards committees are trying to do and how they're trying to change things and deal with the changes countries are making in their intellectual property. So I probably can't answer that specifically because I'm a little bit out of date on it.
And George, I'd have to say something similar. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. We lived in a standards world because we had to communicate, any of these modems had to communicate with other modems. And we also went through, at USR, when the 56K modem came out, those were not standards-based modems. They're the person that invented that, which is a wonderful story. He ended up inuring most of the financial benefit of a non-standard at that time. But the benefit that he provided every person in this room just seems to me that he deserved the benefit for the work that he did. I know this isn't quite answering your question, but that's the best I can do.
Hi, my name is Mark. And as somebody who still has a USR in the basement, and I still have some old Motorola products, big fan of both. And knowing that you guys are such prolific investors, what do you think is the roadmap for Chicago in terms of having been there in the hardware and in the investment side to grow that here in Chicago and to bring more investment? As you know, there's a lot of obviously startups here that have that hardware. um, and are looking to grow their businesses. And as somebody who's spent time here and spent time on the West Coast, it's a different climate there than it is here in terms of embracing and investing. And how do you see that roadmap for getting more investment here in Chicago for the hardware community?
So I think the answer to the question is it depends. Let's see. So innovation starts with great ideas, and all you need are people with great ideas. Money flows to people with great ideas. Resources flow to people with great ideas. And so it's really up to Chicago and or the entrepreneurs or the people that are starting companies or those companies that are spinning off divisions to create something that you can't find in San Francisco. CleverSafe, you couldn't find it in San Francisco. And so there are a variety of other things I'm involved with you can't find in San Francisco either. And that's because we look for things that are really different. So if the ideas are great and they're truly original and truly differentiated, Chicago will have no problem, because Chris Gladwin had no problem getting the business funded. And so we helped him do that, and it worked out great, and there are other things going on like that in Chicago right now. So there's no handicap here in Chicago. But when people talk about systemic issues, it has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the entrepreneur who has a great idea, like this character over here, and he starts a business, and guess what? You're off and running. That's all it has to happen.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's never about the money. It's always about the idea, the quality of people that are involved, the teams that get put together. It's not hard to see great ideas. And once you find a great idea, it's not hard to find money. At least enough to prove that it's a great idea or not. You know, CleverSafe was a wonderful example, as I said before, of this iterative process. But we always came up with the money to try again, to go the next step. It wasn't without pain, but it was always available as long as there was a plan.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got 1871, you've got mHUB that are places which are making welcome, receiving new ideas and helping them get started and all that kind of stuff, and that's going to help. There are serial entrepreneurs like Mike and Michael Farrow and all kinds of folks that have been all over Chicago starting businesses, J.V. Pritzker now. So there's, all you need is the idea. Get the team together and off you go. And, you know, start it tomorrow. Don't wait till the weekend.
So my question is, with autonomous vehicles, which are already changing the world, with the landscape of insurance and everything is linked to the cloud, how do you think the Internet of Things is going to tie in with driverless cars and even blockchain?
Could you just repeat the last part? I didn't quite understand or hear.
So with the driverless vehicles, the insurance will change. And I was wondering, since they will use the cloud and Internet of Things also uses the cloud, how do you think both of them will work together or tie in?
Yeah,
And-
so I think there's some of these
Yeah. So the cloud is a front end to bring some computing resource to you. And it's sitting in a building just like all the other data centers in the world. The cloud is not really a cloud of anything. It's a bunch of people that are providing computing services for you, right? And so I don't see that as a limiting factor in any of this stuff. Sorry?
security and
And
hacking.
hacking, it's like a dashboard war, right? Who's going to win?
Well, we talked about 15 or 20 minutes ago about the whole concept of this iterative process that has to go on to make it a more secure, safer, friendlier environment. And I think that's very important in this whole thing. I mean, it's that iterative process that is going to make this distributed computing available to machines and people all over the world.
Have you spent any time looking at blockchain? I mean, I think
I
some of the
have.
questions about security. Do you have a point of view on it?
I
you
do.
Wanna, you got a company?
I have an
you got
opinion
a
about-
company
I
that,
have an
that
opinion
you
about
want to tell me I should
everything.
invest in? You got a company to share a name for me?
So blockchain is a pretty amazing thing. Blockchain is an amazing thing, meaning that there's this immutable database that is shared, and there's a reason for a whole bunch of people to be involved in making sure that they make this immutable, right? Make it unchangeable. That has nothing to do with the kinds of uses. One of the uses of blockchain, of course, is Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin or any of these other ones. But the most interesting part is not that to me, because that's a social thing. How do you create a fiat currency? I have no idea how to answer any of those questions. But I know that this immutable database that they've come up with is going to change the way lots of financial institutions and service institutions do business.
And manufacturing.
And manufacturing.
Supply chain and logistics going to
It's-
transform it radically.
It's terrific, yeah. So the answer is I don't know a blockchain business yet, but I do look all the time.
It's early. It might be earlier than the IoT ones.
All right, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Certainly, Karen, Chris, Michael, really appreciate your time. It's really informative. A couple quick notes. We do have 2 upcoming events. We just locked in the date for our 1-year anniversary for March 9th. And so mark that date down. And then our next Industry Disruptors will be June 7th with Chris Badwin. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.